Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, AFC, Action Figure Captures. In today's video, we're going to do part 2 of our Photoshop Basics and Photography Basics tutorial. This video will be covering how to create a layer mask and to edit that layer mask in Photoshop. As mentioned, today we're going to be doing masking and removing figures from a background, whether it be a solid background or another photograph. In this case, we're using a solid black background to remove them from. And we're going to be able to mask them out of this background, and we're going to drop them into a new one. Okay? Now, before we get started into the traditional method of how to mask, there is actually in the newer versions of Photoshop a method to actually create a layer mask just by clicking a quick remove background option. So when you go look at your properties window here in the side, when you scroll up, you'll notice, or scroll downward, sorry, you'll notice that you have an option in quick actions to remove background. So what happens with that is if you actually do that, it'll actually have Photoshop try to figure out where all the edges of the actual image are and to basically look at deleting anything, or sorry, masking out anything that you don't want in the background. It does a very good job, but at times it actually can miss things. And in this particular case, I've already tested it, and it actually does end up wiping out the edge of the feet here and the boots and everything, because I am using that black background in the original photograph. So that actually does knock out part of the image that we actually want to keep. And so that's why we're going to go into the traditional method and show you the longer process and how it's actually done. Okay, so here right now, just to give you an example, I'm going to click on remove background, and you'll see actually what happens here. Now you'll notice I created a second duplicate layer. That's only because of the fact that I want to make sure that I don't actually kind of destroy the original image. So I'm creating that secondary backup layer to make sure that we're only altering it as opposed to possibly, doing any damage to the original photo. So you'll notice here now that it's actually kind of knocked out a lot of the feet, part of the snake, part of the snake's tail and everything. And that's why we're not going to use this method in particular at the moment, and we're going to use the actual traditional method and just do the entire photo through the masking process. So we're going to want to create a new document in Photoshop. So we're going to go to File, New. This is going to be up our setup. What we want to do is we want to make a document that's going to be 10 inches wide by 8 inches high with a resolution of 300 pixels per inch with a color mode of RGB, 8-bit, transparent background, and I'm using the Adobe RGB color profile as well. And our document's ready to go. So with our workspace created, the first thing we want to do is we want to create an adjustment layer and a solid color. I'm going to be using black in this case, so that when we actually bring our photo into the new workspace and we're looking to mask it out, we'll be able to actually see the edges more easily and make sure that we're actually not going into the subject area that we want to keep and only be removing the background that we don't want. So the first thing you want to do is you want to click on the adjustments layer here at the bottom. You can hit solid color and select black and hit OK. Now we're ready to mask out our image. So at this point, we're going to want to go into Photoshop. We're going to go File. We're going to open the location where the photo we wanted to work on is. You're going to go to the folder you're looking for. So wherever you decided to save your images that you want to work on, we're going to go into that folder. In this case, I'm using the Raw10 Battlesnake Cobra Commander folder here that I've created. We're going to scroll down. I'm going to open up my folder here, find my image, which is called Cobra Commander Battlesnake. I'm going to double click to open it. And then at this point, we've opened our image, and now what we've got to do is drag this from just being opened by itself into our workspace. So we're going to click on the image, and then we're going to drag it into the untitled document space, and then we're going to release it. I believe on PC this would actually involve having to right-click and then clicking on the image and dragging it over, and then just simply releasing the key. Now to resize the image, because obviously it's too small here, what we're going to want to do is we're going to bring this to the bottom half of the screen here. And to enlarge it, we're going to hit Command-T on Mac or Control-T on PC, and that's going to allow us to transform the image. Now, in earlier versions of Photoshop, CS6 and earlier I believe, when you wanted to scale an image, you had to hold the Shift key and then click on the corner of the object and then begin to drag it while holding the Shift key, and that would actually constrain the proportions for you and make sure that you actually kept the right scale without distorting the image. In newer versions, what you're going to do is just simply click on the corner and drag that out, and it will actually rescale, maintaining its proportions. When you're holding the shift key on the newer versions, it does the opposite and it actually will distort the image. Whereas in the earlier versions of Photoshop, it was basically when you did not hold shift, it would actually distort the image. And when you held shift, it actually constrained your proportions and kept the scale the way it originally appeared. So in this case now, I'm just going to click on the corner and I'm going to drag this out to about here, where I want to actually be able to see the edges of the photo, but at the same time I want it to be large enough that I can work in the workspace. And then we're just going to hit return or enter to confirm the selection. So now we're ready to create our layer mask to remove the background that we don't want here. And we're going to want to make sure that we paint around the areas that we want to remove, and we're going to make sure to leave the actual figures as our subject. So to do so, what we're going to do is we're going to click on the Add Layer Mask icon here at the bottom corner. You're going to click that once, it's going to add our layer mask. From here, we need to select our brush tool to be able to actually remove the background by painting it away. So to do so, you have to make sure that the black color here is your foreground color, and you're going to want to select your brush tool. Make sure you're using a hard edge brush from your brush selection. You don't want anything with a soft edge because it'll actually kind of just soften the edges of the image as opposed to giving you a nice sharp clean image along the edges. So you're going to want to select a hard brush tool, make sure it's at 100% opacity, okay? And then you're going to start painting away the areas that you want to remove. Now, you'll notice the brush tool here is actually quite small with that little circle there. To enlarge it, you're going to use your right-hand bracket on your keyboard to enlarge it. If you want to make it smaller so that when you get closer to the edges of the actual figures, you're going to use the left-hand bracket to actually reduce the size of the brush. So in this case here, because we have a large area here that I can remove, I'm going to enlarge the brush tool and I'm going to start painting away the background area. Now you'll notice it's hard to see what's happening, so basically to see where you're painting away, you're going to basically want to hit the backslash key on your keyboard, and that's going to add this red layer here so you can see where you're actually painting, and it's showing you what areas are being covered up, okay? So as we paint away the areas around the figure, you want to make sure to be careful not to go into the edges of the figure, and you're just going to paint away all the areas in the larger spots that you can get rid of, and then we'll actually reduce the brush size and we'll go in and we'll actually start painting away the areas closer to the figure that we have to be careful of not to paint into. So we're just going to continue to paint away the areas here that we don't want in the image by simply using the paintbrush with the foreground color of black selected, which is basically here, of course. And we're just going to paint away all these areas that we don't want, and we're going to get as close to the figure as possible without painting into it to make sure we remove the areas we don't want. So I'm just going to get rid of all these areas here just to make sure that there's no confusion about what areas we're keeping. If you do choose to load an entire image in there and it takes the entire background that you're painting into, make sure to paint away all the areas that are actually showing and have this solid red area around the entire area that you want to get rid of, okay? Now when you want to get into the actual subject and you want to zoom in to get closer now so that we can delete the areas closer to the figure, two things we need to do is we have to zoom in, of course. To do so on a Mac, and I believe on a PC laptop as well, you're just going to use your two fingers from the center and you're going to gesture outwards to enlarge the area that you're trying to get into. And it's taking a little while, but we'll get there. You're just going to zoom in here as much as we can, and then to reposition the image once it stops doing so, you're just going to hold your two fingers again and kind of reposition the photo to where you want to start along the edge. And we're going to zoom in a little bit tighter here. And then now you'll notice our brush is obviously too big to basically paint away the area. So I actually start to paint now. I'm going to delete a much larger area than I intend to. If you accidentally do something like that, to reverse that, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to switch on to where your foreground and background colors are here, and you're going to basically hit this little toggle key here in the corner with the two arrows to swap to the white tone up front, because white will actually replace color. Black is going, or so replace parts of the image. The black will actually remove parts of the image. So in this case here, we're wanting to paint back areas that we accidentally deleted. So we're just going to basically start clicking on the image here and repainting the areas that we accidentally deleted. Now we need to flip back to the black for the foreground so we can start removing again. And then now we're going to use the left-hand bracket on your keyboard to reduce the size of the brush so we can continue to paint around the edge of the figure. And then once we get to that area and we've gotten around the side of the figure, we're going to enlarge the brush again with the right-hand bracket, and that will allow us to begin to delete more of the actual background area that we don't want again. So now we're close enough that we can start painting away the area around the figure. So we're going to reduce the brush size. We're going to go against the edge of the helmet here, and we're just going to start painting away. Now, if you have a straight edge, you can literally just click in the one area to start your brush. You're going to hold shift, and then you're just going to click the area where you want to stop the straight edge, and you're just going to click again, and it will paint away that entire straight edge there, so you don't have to keep following along the side. Now, because this area of the helmet has that little groove, we're going to make sure we zoom in, and then we're going to paint around this area here to make sure we don't accidentally delete that detail of the helmet. Now, this is a time-consuming process, guys, so doing all this is going to take you a little while, and you're going to want to take your time and paint around the entire area and be careful. Again, if you do happen to go in, you make a mistake, you paint too far in, just toggle the brush back to being white and paint again into the area that you want to restore. And that's going to restore the area that you want to put back inside. Flip your brush back to black and then start painting away again the areas that you want to get rid of. Now you'll see I'm getting to the edge of the image here and I need to start painting up towards the top of the helmet, so I'm going to hold my two fingers together and I'm going to move my mouse downwards to start seeing that other edge of the helmet, and again I'm going to start painting away the areas that I don't want. Now what I tend to do a lot of the time when I'm actually doing these sort of edits is I will actually look for areas that are actually quite tight, and I'll start painting those away first so that I can actually start painting into bigger, larger areas afterwards and getting rid of those in a much larger selection. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint downwards, and I'm going to paint into the areas that are a little tighter so I can get rid of those first and then work around and delete in bigger groups. Again, I'm going to want to zoom in here and then reposition the photo using the positional gesture, and I'm going to then start painting away the edge by the gun here. Now that I've got that area done, you'll see that I have enough room here to paint away in a larger brush. So I'm going to kind of go into this area here, paint away the spot I want to get rid of, and then I'm going to end up zooming out and painting away this area by the helmet and gun with a larger brush. So now I'm going to zoom back out. And then I'm going to enlarge the brush once we're there. And now I can start painting away this edge a little more comfortably because I know I'm not going to go into the part of the helmet that we just painted towards. And then I can get rid of that area. Now you'll notice there I just made a bit of a mistake. There's two mistakes here that I'm actually going to point out. You'll see I left a little speck here by the helmet. You want to make sure that when you're painting, you're careful not to leave any kind of remnants of the background. So you're going to want to zoom in, see the spot that we accidentally left, and you're just going to want to paint that away as well. Now, one thing I did catch is that I basically did accidentally paint away a little bit of the silver here at the edge of the helmet. So I'm going to reverse the brushes again. I'm going to resize my brush, and I'm going to paint back that little bit of the edge of the helmet that I actually painted away. Actually, it looks like I actually was closer to the edge than I thought, so I can actually paint that back away after all. So I'm going to switch the brushes back, and I'm just going to go back along that edge and paint away that area. The reason why we selected that black background to begin with is so that we could create this red ruby layer to be able to make sure that we could see clearly where the edges of those areas are. So that black fill in the background is what's allowing us to see this red area so clearly. Otherwise it would be more translucent and it'd be a little harder to see those hard edges. Okay, I'm going to continue to do the brushing here, and I'm going to brush away all this background. We'll kind of hopefully speed up the video and you won't have to sit through all of this, and we'll pick up once I've got the entire area masked out, okay? One thing I did mean to mention, guys, is basically when you're painting away your background, again, of course, you want to look for areas like this where it's actually really tight between the shoulder of the figure here and your secondary subject, which is the snake in this case, and these areas in between the snake's tail, down here between, again, the tail. you want to make sure that you pay attention to areas like that because a lot of time you might miss those. And when you drop them into a background, you tend to see these spots that weren't painted away, so you don't see the underlying background through them, so it looks a little off. So you want to make sure you zoom in and you pay attention to those areas, and you also make sure to paint those away, okay? Basically just like this. Make sure you fall as close to the edge as possible of the subject without painting into it. And I painted a little bit into that little gold coin there, gold emblem, and I'm going to paint that back in just a moment once I remove this black area. Now we're going to flip our brush and we're going to paint that bit of gold back in there. And this is where it becomes a little tedious because you got to kind of flip back and forth and zoom in and get closer to the edges and then paint away that area that you don't want again. Just to make sure that you have everything you want in your image in the actual areas you want them to be. And then now we're going to scroll down to where that area in the tail was. It's a little hard to tell here, so we're going to zoom back out a little bit, figure out our spot, and then we'll zoom back in again. And we'll start painting that away. Again, because it is a long straight area, I can actually just hold shift, paint away that area. And you'll notice there's actually black showing through on the tail there. To get rid of that, again, you're just going to kind of pick your spot where you see the black edging. You're going to click and then basically take your shift key, click again, and continue to paint as much of that black away as possible so that when you drop this into that new background, that black edge isn't really going to be showing through. So we're just going to continue to paint all this area out of the way. If you do happen to go into the area a little bit, basically it's not that big a deal unless it's an important detail. In this case here, the snake's tail, there's some shaded areas here that aren't really going to be missed. So you can edge into it a little bit to make sure you get rid of all that extra black or whatever color background you actually did shoot behind your figure. And you're just going to kind of go into the subject a little bit just so that you can kind of paint away that extra edge that might show through in the background that you choose to put the photo into later. And then once we got this edge painted away and we actually have all the spots we want to keep, I can start enlarging my brush and then holding my shift key and quickly painting away the areas that we don't want. And you just need to paint away all the black again, as we said. And then here I can, again, once I get further and further away from the edge that we want to keep, I can keep enlarging my brush and painting away those areas a little more quickly. And again, if any mistakes are made as you get too close to the edge, you can always flip the brush from black to white and then paint the area that you accidentally painted away back in. In this case, we didn't do anything like that, so we're okay. So we're just going to continue to paint away the black. And then we're going to zoom back out and get that final spot that I mentioned in the tail. So right there, we're going to get in there. Now you'll notice the edge of Cobra Commander's jacket there showing through. So you want to make sure that you don't paint away that spot, obviously. So you're going to want to make sure you start your edge a little closer there. In this case here, that little red spot is part of the tail or the jacket. So you can leave that in there or you can paint right to that black edge. It should be fine. In this case, I'm going to try and leave that little red edge in there. And then I'm going to paint away all the extra black around this area of the tail. Now you're going to hit shaded areas that look a little too dark to kind of see where the edge is. At that point you're guessing a little bit, so you're going to want to reduce your brush size, get as tight a little point as possible, and then you're going to want to zoom, enlarge your brush again, and then start painting away the area you want to keep. Or the area you want to remove, forgive me, not keep. You want to make sure you don't delete the areas you want to keep, of course. Okay, so now with those areas deleted, or actually, sorry, masked, we can now zoom back out and start focusing on the areas that are larger that we can get rid of again, and just going as close to the edges of the characters as possible, and make sure to keep those in the image. So here again, we're on the outside, and we're just going to start painting away those large areas and getting as close to the object as possible without painting into it. And again, I'm going to go back to continuing to do this so that you're not having to listen to me ramble on. And I will pick up once I've got this all masked out, and we can move forward with the next step.
I'm a fan of taking some time away and maybe go to the beach and drink my time away. Every now and then I would maybe catch a wave and maybe get me some ice cream someday. Last time I was floating in space and you shook my hand and told me everything's gonna be great. Every time you say that something's bad or something's not right.
So at this point, I just want to jump back into the video for a second, guys, and explain a situation that does come up from time to time, where you'll have a trouble area where you're basically having a hard time seeing the edges of the subject you're trying to delete, or to mask, sorry. And what you want to do is just basically do your best, get in tight there, zoom in as close as you can, and basically just try and get along the edge, follow through. You're going to kind of get a rough idea as to when you're going through. You see it kind of dips here a little bit based on the areas above here, and you can just kind of follow through, do your best to figure where that sort of snake underbelly is going to be, or the object that you're working on is going to be, and just kind of follow as best you can, and try and follow the areas around the subject that actually look as if they might suggest where things change, and just follow up and go across and continue on again, of course. Now with the boots on Cobra Commander here, you can see this whole area is quite dark. What you're going to want to do is start at the edge that you can see, work your way down. Now I've done this guy a few times, so I kind of know he has a little lip on his boot here, so I'm going to try and create that little lip, and then I'm going to just basically follow along. And based on the pattern above here, you'll see how it kind of dips in here to create the ridges on the boot. It's going to be a similar situation down here at the edge of the boot here, where it's going to have those little ridges. So I'm going to create those little ridges myself, just by following along with the shadows and the highlights on the area above. And then I'm just going to straighten this out a little bit more, and I'm going to dip in a bit there. And we're just going to follow through here. In this whole area where it gets darker again, you're kind of guessing at this point. The heel comes up around here on this boot that I can remember. I'm just going to dip down a little bit, create a heel, and then follow up. Now I chose to use a black background while shooting these characters and these figures, sorry, because I was fairly familiar with shooting with a black background. If you shot with a white background or if you shot with another background that's brighter, you probably won't run into this problem. Um, but you know, if you do, this is generally the way that I tend to work it out, where I'm just kind of creating the areas that I think will be part of the boot. So you want to just kind of try your best to create that look, and then just continue on and follow through with the painting. And again, if you make any mistakes here and you're not happy with what you did, just flip back to the white foreground color, and you can repaint areas in to fill those spots back in again. And just continue to do your masking as best you can and get these guys out, and then follow your highlights again from the darker areas. Remember to reduce your brush size so you can get in tighter, and just get as tight to those details as possible. And when you go to drop this in, it won't be terribly noticeable, and if it is, you'll save this as a PSD file or a Photoshop file, and you can always go back in and tweak it by painting the areas again that you don't like on the layer mask that you have created on the PSD file. That is one thing I did forget to mention, guys. When you're saving this, you're going to want to save your progress as you go along to make sure that you have it. And you want to save as a PSD file or a Photoshop file, or a Photoshop document, forgive me. And that will actually allow you to open up and pick up where you left off in case you can't get the time to finish it right away in one sitting, or in case you want to go back and make changes at a later time. Okay, so at this point we're in the home stretch of the masking process. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to continue to finish up on this one area of the tail, and we'll almost be finished. There's a spot coming up that I want you guys to see that can be a little difficult to gain because it's a really small area that you have to paint away. And so I wanted to make sure that I actually took the time to show you how to handle those really small areas and those smaller gaps as you get into the tighter spots on your imaging that you want to actually remove. So you'll notice as I'm passing this portion of the tail here off to the right hand side, we do have the layers of the tail that are actually meant to be open as well. There is some black in there, and we want to be able to make sure we remove all that so that they don't show up in the final image. So what we're going to do is, again, we're going to make our brush as small as possible, and we're just going to follow along in those really tight areas. Now basically, with it being tighter and tighter as you get up, you're going to have to keep resizing your brush and going up into those tight areas to make sure you get rid of as much of that background as possible, so that it's not showing through, preferably all of it, but as much as possible to make sure that you don't see it in the new image. And you just continue on painting away those areas. And it's just so that you don't have like a different area in your final image from the actual background. So I don't have this solid black area in the final image as opposed to seeing the actual background I want to be seen showing through those edges of the tail. And depending on what you shot with, you may have the similar areas where if you don't paint these away, they're going to show up and it's going to look like there's some kind of area blocking your background, which won't make any sense in the final image. We're just going to continue to paint away all of those areas. It can be easy to miss these areas sometimes if you're not looking closely enough. It's happened to me in the past. So you just want to make sure that you try to examine the image and make sure, hey, that shouldn't be there, and make a point of getting rid of it. Okay, so at this point, I believe we are finally ready to zoom back out and take a look at our finalized mask and give us an idea of where we are. In case there's anywhere that I missed, I'm just going to look around the image and make sure that there's no spot that I missed. And as you can see, it's a good thing that I did because I wasn't paying attention and I missed this entire area here. So I'm going to have to go back in and paint all of that area out. Okay, so we're just about to finish up our layer mask. What we're going to do now is just get the final pieces of the background out of the way here. And why I wanted to show you this part as well is just because when we're getting close to where we're hitting edges here, where you have some nice kind of sculpted details in the hilt of the sword and everything, and you want to make sure that you kind of take the time to trace around each little bump and groove in areas like this to make sure that you capture all those details. So, I mean, they put a lot of effort into sculpting these figures. You want to make sure you show those details off. If you were to take, the quick way out, and some people actually will just kind of do that whole click on the one area and just basically use the shift key to go straight up, you knock out all those little ridges and bumps that you'd have through the original sculpt, and you don't want to do that. So you want to make sure that you actually take your time to trace on them properly. Now, with that one line that I just deleted, rather than just paint it back by swapping the brush tool back to the white and be able to paint that back in, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a step backward by hitting Command Z or Command Z and having that flip back and put that area back in. Command Z or Command Z basically just undoes the previous step that you just did. And you can do that up to 25 times in Photoshop in most cases. I believe the newer versions now, you have unlimited step back options. And I'm just going to slowly trace around these little areas of the snake's hilt on the sword. And then we can go back to the wider brush now that we got all those areas in there and paint away what's left. And then just around these areas by the belt here and the edge of the sword blade, we're going to again be careful to get in there. And we're going to paint along that edge and come up here along the belt. And we're going to get rid of that part of the background. Now there I accidentally deleted part of or masked part of the sword hilt, so we're just going to swap to the white brush, and we're going to paint that back in. And there we go, back to black, and we're going to finish up painting away the edges around the sword blade. Use a wider tool again, and we're just going to finish off what's left of the background that we want to remove. And once you're done, you can just click on the movement tool, or the move tool, and basically just zoom back out and make sure you got all the areas that you need out of the way done. And then at that point, we are finished. And you'll notice there I accidentally clicked on the open space here in the background, so it did take that ruby lift mask off, or that layer off, to let us see the final area. And now you can notice here we have a completely removed background with just our figures showing through, and we're ready to move it into the new background for its new home. Okay, so we reached the final stages of the masking tutorial video. I'm glad you guys have made it, and I hope you had a good time and learned something new. We're going to then now move into basically positioning our figure, straightening it out and rotating the object in case we want to, basically if he's not quite straight, we want to make sure he's actually straight and that it's at the size we'd like it to be. So at this point we're going to hit Command T, and we're basically at this point going to be able to actually rotate or enlarge or reduce the size of the figures as we see fit. Now you'll notice the arrows on this on the mouse pointer right now keep changing, and it's because of the fact that if I actually highlight the corner here, that's going to allow me to resize the image to make it either larger or smaller. to make sure we can put it the scale that we'd like it to be. And again, when doing that, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make sure that if we're using the old version of Photoshop, CS6 or earlier, you're going to hold Shift, and then you're going to click on the actual corner square there, and you're going to be able to drag that in and out while holding Shift and the mouse to basically resize the images you'd like. On the newer versions of CC and so forth, you're literally just going to click and move your corner in and out. Basically, that's going to allow you to keep the scale and the proportions as they are so that we don't get a distorted image. Now, if the image is off center or if it's actually on a bit of an angle, this is the same point where we're actually going to then move the arrow to the point where we have the kind of curved arrow there. And we're going to basically just kind of turn the image until we're happy with it, and make sure it actually looks as straight as we'd like it to be. And once we've got that kind of situated, then at that point we're just going to hit return or enter on your keyboard, and that's going to basically resize and kind of rotate the image to where we wanted it to be. Okay, so at this point you'll notice we basically have that solid black background that we started with when we did the fill layer. If you unclick that by hitting the eyeball here, it's going to remove the background, and you can see we have our masked out figures, and now there's nothing in behind them but that translucent background. So at that point we can now select the layer, and if we want to add a different photograph in behind here, we can just basically go to Photoshop, go to File, go Open. If you have a background image you'd like to select, you just basically have to navigate to that image, open the image up, and then you're going to click on it and you're going to drag it into the workspace, and then you're going to click into the workspace and you're going to release the click, and that'll actually drop the image in there. Now this is a very small image, so obviously we need to resize that, and then as well it's sitting on top of our images at the moment. So what we want to do first is we're going to want to resize that. So again, we're going to go Command T, and then again holding Shift if on CS6 or earlier, as well as dragging and dropping. You're going to basically click and drag while holding Shift, drag out those images, like the corners, to where you'd like them to be so that they fit the actual full workspace. Again, with the newer ones, you don't need to hold Shift in this case here because we're not going to distort the image. It's going to hold the proportions the way they're meant to be. Once you have it kind of situated where we are and we're actually kind of outside the workspace, you can then hit return or enter. It's going to drop the image where it is on top, and then at that point we're just going to click on the layer and we're going to drag it below our figures. And then if you don't like where it's positioned at that point, you can then click on the layer again and you're going to drag the image to the spot that you actually want it to be. So whatever you want showing in the background is where you're going to drag that to. And then once you have it in the spot that you'd like it to be, you'll notice that there's no proper shadow underneath the figure's feet or underneath the belly of the snake. To correct that, what you can do is you can just basically hit the new layer tab or the new layer icon here down in the bottom corner here. That's going to put a layer in between our new background and our figures, and then at that point we're going to basically take our paintbrush. We don't want a really hard edge here. We're going to want a soft edge and look like a natural shadow, like it's blending. So you're going to click that little down arrow. You're going to basically select a soft edge brush, and then at that point we want to lower the opacity. Now I already had it at 22%. We would normally be at 100%. You're going to want to lower that to about 20%, roughly 20% anyway. And then basically we're going to take that paintbrush and you're going to resize it the way you'd like by using your bracket keys, right to make it larger, left to make it smaller. And then once you have it to the size you want it to be, you're going to start painting in behind the figure. And you don't have to be exact here. You're just kind of roughing out a new shadow underneath the figure's feet and underneath the belly of the snake here, or whatever object you chose. When you let go of your paint tool there, you can basically then go over it a second time and it'll make the shadow a little bit darker, and it'll actually help you to create a bit deeper shadow so that it looks again more natural. It's not too light or too dark. And you just basically continue to do that until you get it to the darkness that you're comfortable with. And then there we have it where it looks like it blends a bit better, as you can see. And then you basically have your layer set up with your shadow. And that's basically how you would add that background with the shadow to basically make it look more natural. Now don't forget to save your work, guys. You're always going to want to go up to File, and you're going to go down to Save As, and make sure you name your file, of course. In this case I'm going to be naming it Cobra Commander Battlesnake. and it saves it's a PSD file or a Photoshop document, you kind of want that to save so that if you want to make any changes, you can actually go back in, relaunch the document, and make your changes as you'd like. So you're going to save that as a PSD there so that you have it. And basically that's going to create your new document wherever you chose to save it. And then if you want to save it as a JPEG picture and just go ahead, if you're actually happy with it as it is, you're just going to go do the same thing again, back up to save as. And instead of saying Photoshop document here for format, you're going to want to click on the tab there and basically go down to JPEG, and then you can actually see that it's been renamed as a JPEG. Again, it's going to save wherever you've chosen to save it as your destination, and then you're just going to go down to save, and we're going to basically save it with the same file name or whatever file name you'd like it to be, and then now it's created our new JPEG image with the new background added. Now this isn't where I want to be with this image because I'm going to be basically doing a further edit here where we're going to be basically using the black background, and I want to add some effects to the image further, so I'm going to remove these two layers because I don't want them. So I'm just going to basically highlight both. To highlight both layers here, if you want to delete both at the same time, you're just basically going to click on the first one, hold shift, click on your second, and then you're going to hit your delete key. That gets rid of those two layers so that we don't have them in our image again. At this point here, I'm going to be saving this as is because I'm going to be using this in the next document to basically do the glowing eyes for the snake, the lens barrel flare, our text, our logos, any other effects that I want to add. I'm going to be adding them in there now in the next video, okay? And that one's going to be basically on adding effects through Photoshop. That brings us to the end of the video at this point. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you've learned something. If you have and you really enjoyed yourselves, please consider liking and subscribing and hitting the notifications bell to let you know when that next video is ready, and you can come back in and check out that new video, and it'll explain how to add those effects I spoke of. A huge thank you to TJ Habibi of Secret Suburbia for allowing us to use his amazing music in this video. If you like what you heard, please check out his music in the links below, and enjoy your day.